Microsoft provides extensive documentation related to Azure cloud adoption. This is called the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework for Azure. You can search for that using your favorite search engine in a web browser and quickly come to this page. Now, one of the great things about this is it's not just a description of the services in Azure that allow migration, but also provides some things like cloud adoption tools and templates. If I click on that link, so from here, for example, when I look at tools and templates, there are many categories of planning tools available, such as a cloud journey tracker. As we go further down through the list, also have options for readiness checklists to check for cloud readiness, even naming and tagging conventions in the Azure cloud. Because it's so quick and easy to provision resources, over time you could end up with thousands of resources. And so it's important that cloud technicians in Azure adhere to a standard naming convention and even a standard tagging convention that's put in place. You can even control things like default tagging if cloud technicians don't do it. You can control that through Azure policy. So why don't we take a look at that naming and tagging Excel spreadsheet? I'm going to go ahead and click on the link to download the file, and then I'll open it. So this is a really great planning document for anyone adopting Microsoft Azure because we want to have consistent naming for resources. So as we scroll down through the spreadsheet, there are some examples of resource type prefixes. For example, if you're going to deploy a subnet in Azure, perhaps you would go with a prefix standard of SNet-. Virtual machines might have a VM- prefix. App services might have an AZ app-. This is obviously customizable, but it is something that should be centralized and adhered to by all Azure cloud technicians. When we go to the naming conventions tab at the bottom in this planning document, we also get some specific examples of what we might do. Let's say for deploying virtual networks, we might have a format that includes the virtual network, followed by a dash, the subscription type for Azure, such as pay-as-you-go, dash the region, and then dash a number. So that number for that VNet within that region, within that subscription. And then you have examples shown over on the right. And this exists for all of the different types of resources that you might choose to deploy, including virtual machines that you might deploy. So standards are going to be important as part of your migration. And that also includes tagging. We have examples of key and value pairs that you might want to use, such as for a business unit or a cost center, or a disaster recovery flag, such as mission critical, critical, or essential, that type of thing. There are also design planning documents for migration. In other words, setting up the infrastructure before migrating services into the Azure cloud. So if I scroll down under the Ready section, I can view the best practices for Azure readiness. And on the right, as I scroll down, we've got some references to network preparation. So our virtual network planning, whether we want to have a hub and spoke network topology by pairing VNets together, and also our identity and access control solutions for users and groups, such as whether we'll create them in Azure AD or link Azure AD to an existing on-premises Active Directory environment. Then our storage documentation, databases that might need to be put in place, and how they can be migrated using the database migration service. There are also some documentation links here listed for cost management, such as for optimizing costs based on recommendations. So as an example of that, if you're going to be running a non-mission critical workload in a virtual machine, then you might want to deploy that as a spot instance where you're using extra Azure data center compute capacity that's available at that time at a discount. Whereas if you know you're going to be running something mission critical for the long term, 1 year or more, 24/7, you might look at using reserved instances to run that at a discount compared to pay-as-you-go. I'm just going to scroll up and in the upper left, go back to the Cloud Adoption Framework link. So from here, I can scroll down and I could jump to the Migrate section where I could click on the Azure Migration Guide. So from here, we have a discussion of the migration tools and how they would be used. And on the left, if I click Assess Workloads, we'll actually get a listing of how to use some of the Azure Migrate Service tools for assessing on-premises suitability for migration to the Azure cloud, including instructions on how to create a new server migration project, for example. But if I scroll back up to the top, we can also take a look at scenarios and how The Azure Migrate service might be used in order to migrate a lot of these items into the cloud. Just going to go back to the main cloud adoption framework page, where at the top, to actually begin the process, other than exploring what's available here, you would click the Start Your Cloud Journey under the Get Started section. And really from here, it's a lot of doing your homework and taking a look at the organizational process in planning for cloud adoption, including, if we go down, for example, establishing teams which would ensure that we've got technicians that are either Azure certified or have equivalent knowledge in order to be able to migrate things successfully into the Azure cloud.